This exciting collection makes space for Black girls in horror in a brand new way. 15 chilling and thought-provoking stories place Black girls front and center as heroes and survivors who slay monsters, battle spirits, and face down death. We know that you're going to enjoy these stories and the conversation about them. We're joined tonight by moderator Karen Strong. She's the critically acclaimed author of middle grade novels Just South of Home, as well as The Secret Dead Club. She is the editor of the young adult anthology Cool, Awkward, Black, and a Star Wars contributor featured in From a Certain Point of View, The Empire Strikes Back, and Stories of Jedi and Sith. Her speculative short fiction appears in the award-winning anthology A Phoenix First Must Burn, and the forthcoming horror anthology The White Guy Dies First, which is publishing later this year from Tor Teen. Born and raised in rural Georgia, Karen is an avid lover of strong coffee, yellow flowers, and night skies. So we're really excited to have her here to interview the two editors of this book. Saraciea J. Fennell is a Black Honduran American writer, founder of The Bronx is Reading, and creator of Honduran Garifuna Writers. She is also a book publicist who has worked with many award-winning and New York Times bestselling authors. And Charis has had the pleasure of working with her many times to bring many authors to Atlanta and to Charis. So I'm really excited to get to meet her in person tonight. She is the editor of the nonfiction anthology Wild Tongues Can't Be Tamed, and her work has appeared in Pop Sugar, Refinery 29, and Cultures, among others. You can sign up for her newsletter, Black Girl Dreaming, on Substack for more of her writing. She lives in the Bronx with her family and Black Poodle, Oreo. And last but not least, Desiree S. Evans writes fiction for children, teens, and adults. She is co-editor of the anthology The Black Girl Survives in This One, which we're celebrating tonight, and a contributor to the anthologies Cool, Awkward, Black, and Foreshadow. Desiree is a 2020 winner of the Walter Dean Myers Grant for Children's Fiction, awarded by the nonprofit organization We Need Diverse Books. She received her MFA in fiction from the Michener Center for Writers and at the University of Texas at Austin, and is currently the Southern Studies Fellowship in Arts and Letters Writer-in-Residence in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Please welcome to the stage Karen Strong, Saraciea J. Fennell, and Desiree S. Evans.
Good evening, y'all.
Good evening.
Hello.
All right. Wow, there we are. There's fun. Thank y'all for coming out tonight. Talk about this wonderful anthology. I know both of these women well, so it's like I feel like we're having like a little conversation, like over dinner, like
Yes.
after dinner,
Yes.
like in a
Yes.
living room. So first of all, I wanted to say, and I told y'all this already, but I want to tell the audience too, congratulations
Thank you.
on your
you.
anthology. The Black Girl Survives in this one. And I really first want to say that being an anthology editor myself, I know that it's a journey to create
It
the
is.
stories, but also not only editing the stories, but also writing your own stories in the collection. I want to talk about that a little bit later, but first of all, I want to talk about how you have the Tananarive do the foreword, and that was exciting. I knew she had me when she said, "Can we live?"
Yes.
That was the first line in her foreword, and I think what I love about this anthology is that there's something for everyone.
Yeah.
There's a story. I love the breadth of the stories. There's sort of like space horror, and there's folk tales. There's like cemeteries, and there's other things. So that's really good. So what I would like to talk about is a little bit for me, because being an editor of anthology too. How did you come about the idea for this anthology?
Oh. Well. Oh, okay. Well, okay. Where should we start?
I think we could start with that. We both were repped at the time by the same literary agent, and we were kind of having conversations about like, what books do you want to like start to write or work on? And we both had the idea to work on a horror anthology. And so our lovely agent, Patrice Caldwell, had said, maybe the two of you should just like connect and see if maybe you have like similar ideas. And funny story is, I was already following Desiree on all of social media. I was already a fan of hers. And so I was like, oh, absolutely. I will meet with her and like Zoom and talk and see what we come up with. And I felt like we had a very long conversation. I think we had booked like a half an hour Zoom that turned into like, I think an hour where we were just talking about horror and our love for the genre and sort of what was lacking in the genre. And I think by the end of that conversation, we kind of landed on talking about Black final girls and kind of thinking like maybe that is what the anthology should be, because there were so many different ideas that we tossed around in that meeting, but we kept going back to like, who's your favorite final girl? And you know, I was like Sidney Prescott or you know, Sanaa Lathan from the Alien versus Predator, and then we just got to talking about how there weren't really a lot of Black final girls, and I think we felt really good by the end of that conversation. And I was like, emailed my agent right after being like, I want to work with her. Like, if she's down, I'm down, you know. Like, I think on the call we had solidified that, but you know, you got to make it official with it's a go.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the time we were talking about, you know, there had been a lot of conversation and kind of the horror zeitgeist around this idea of the final girl. A lot of kind of books had been coming out, kind of that were very meta on it, but none of them had really talked about race, right? And about that kind of intersection of like, well, who gets to survive, really? Who are the final girls, right? So we thought this was a really great opportunity to really, YA as a genre, you know, this idea of the strong heroine figure is so prevalent in the genre in general, but again, it's just now starting to diversify, to talk about who could be the center of the story, and this was an opportunity. We felt like, well, Black final girls, that is the story. That's
the story. She is the
something
moment.
that does not exist on a level that it should exist, particularly given all the stuff that Black girls and Black women go through in the Americas. And so, yeah, we were just really excited when we kind of felt like, this is it. This is it.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So I know that also in this anthology, there was like a really good example of opening up for new writers who may not be known. So tell me a little bit about that, because I know in Cool Awkward Black, I did the same thing. I had an open call for short stories, and I don't know how many y'all got, but I got a lot. I got like over 150 stories. Wow. So talk a little bit about that. Why did you think it was important to have actually y'all have two new voices. So talk a little bit about how important that was to bring some new people on in addition to the established writers you had.
Yeah, I feel like very early on we knew just in the sort of fantasy, sci-fi, horror space, especially for YA, it's not that many Black writers. And so we knew right away that we were like, this could be an opportunity to discover a new, you know, voice that's writing horror, that we could use our little budding platform to sort of, you know, launch someone else's career or to just introduce them in that way. I think, you know, being a Black writer, it's all about community, honestly. And so we had this wonderful book deal, and we were kind of like, okay, let's make sure we can set aside funds to invite a new voice to the table who likely maybe doesn't have a full manuscript to query to get a literary agent, but maybe has like a really strong dynamic story that could be in addition to this collection. I'll let I feel like you really help guide with the guidelines, because I was kind of like, I'm down for doing the new voice, but I don't know how we do this.
But that was my literary magazine.
That would come in handy. That would come in handy.
Exactly.
Open submissions.
And you know, I think the idea of like the new voice, as we kind of touch on, Black horror is having a moment, right? It's had its moment, but you know, in the YA, even like particularly 2.5 years ago, there weren't that many Black horror writers at all. And we're like, okay, like for one, we need
Lamar Giles and maybe Tiffany Jackson.
Yeah, right? And Tiffany and then Justina. You know, and we were like, okay, for one, there's a horror boom happening, but we're not being represented. And we know that particularly in, you know, in our sphere kind of the world, we weren't often given a lot of opportunities to write horror.
Right.
You know, I feel like it's still a very fresh genre that we wanted people to be able to experiment in and to play in and to see if they really like it, you know, which is why kind of a lot of the writers we invited ended up maybe they're not quite horror writers, or they're kind of new to horror, but they were really excited to experiment in this kind of genre. And so that was kind of really exciting for us as well. So we knew that new voices could also be kind of going through that similar negotiation about, like, can I write horror?
Yeah.
Is it a space that I'd be welcome in? Right?
Like, do I even have the opportunity to do so?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And going back to what you said about the submissions, we got so many.
So good.
There were so many, and it was really hard to narrow it down to one. And then, you know, I was like, all right, top 3. You know, I was like, here are top 3, and I'm
Back
like,
and forth
we read it and still fell in love with those top 3. So we sent it to our editors at the publisher, and we were like, we can't decide. You pick one. Here are our top 3 that we love. And, you know, I think they came down and they were like, okay, top 2. And we were like, okay, we'll do a second read of these 2 and kind of figure out which one. And then Desiree and I were like, I can't choose. I think we got to do both.
Yeah, both of the stories that are in this anthology, The New Voices, are phenomenal. I was really blown away with these writers in particular. I think their stories were really good. Very creepy. Yeah.
Very creepy.
Creepy is the word.
Very creepy. So let's talk about, you have 15 stories, and both of you have stories in here. How did you go about determining, like, the order of the stories? Like, I was looking at my book. I was looking through the stories. And I was trying to figure out, okay, how did they order these up? Like, how I have an idea, and if y'all don't want to tell me, if you want to keep it like a secret, that's fine.
No, it's not,
But
it's not a secret.
I was trying to figure out, how did you know how the story? Because here's the thing about an anthology: there's no wrong or right way to read an anthology. For me, I'm just gonna be honest. I usually read my favorite artist. What is artist? I read my favorite author first, and then I go back. But then I do go back and read them in order, because I like to see how the editor would like to read it. So y'all let me know the secrets. How did y'all determine the order of the stories?
You know, I think immediately we knew which story we wanted to end with. We knew we wanted to end really strong and feeling like this main, you know,
Fox Hunt is okay.
Yeah, so Fox Hunt by Charlotte Nicole Davis. You know, it's like an all-American story, but you know, it's talking about the underbelly and like the history of the place, of a town, and this main character Flex goes through this journey that by the end of the book, I was like, this is a really strong ending. You know, Flex is coming out on top and has been through some stuff, both, you know, sort of like traumatically in her life, but at the end, like, she's a survivor. And I felt like out of all of the stories, you just really got that message across really strongly with Fox Hunt. Do you want to talk about why we did L.L. McKinney's first, Harvesters?
Ooh, we just felt like it was one of those kind of, she had this horror take on this all-American kind of cornfield. You know, we thought, like, oh, what if we kind of opened it up on this kind of like classic, scary kind of terrain. Thank you, Children of the Corn. Thank you, like, the Midwestern Gothic, but really kind of, you know, and LL is a you know, a great writer. Like, the story, just the voices in that story. We thought, okay, there's this. It feels very. The dialogue feels very real. It's one of my favorite dialogue pieces of this
Yeah,
series.
L.L. McKinney, she's also the author of A Blade So Black. She actually, so she, to me, what I loved about that story was the dialogue, because the shorts, the thing about a short story, as y'all know, being also contributors, is that you only have a limited space to get the person's attention. And you have to have a character arc, you have to have a beginning, middle, and end, very, very tight space. What I loved about her story in particular was how she made text messages so very, very creepy. Extremely creepy. And I like the way, and when y'all read that story, you'll realize what I'm talking about, because the first text message is very like, you know, whatever. But then as the text messages start coming, they become more ominous. And so I thought she did that really well.
Yeah, and that ending. Whew.
Yeah, exactly.
She ends on a really, really good
good
ending. And then I think the rest of the stories we really couldn't decide.
Yeah, the editors actually
So
helped us out
again-
a lot with that, and then we kind of felt like, okay, this piece here would be a great place to put more of a comedic story, a lighter
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
Because also you want the anthology to kind of have movement and
It
arc
has
as
a
well.
movement. It has a movement. I did the
And
same
again,
thing. I put like
mhm.
in Cool Awkward Black, I put all the like comedies together.
Yeah.
I put all the romances together, and I put all the dark stuff together. So that way, when you read it through, you'll
Kinda
sort of
feel
get a
like-
mood.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
sort of I can see that now that
mhm,
you've said that. I can
Yeah.
see how
Yeah.
you group those stories together.
Yeah.
But yeah, the first story and the last story are always the ones that, from an editorial perspective, you want to make sure because you want to get on a bang.
Start strong and end strong. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Y'all did a good job on that. Good job.
Thank you.
All right. So now I have a specific question for you, Saraciea.
Okay.
Earlier this week on NPR, they're fancy. They were on NPR. They were talking. You elaborated about the event of More Black Authors Publishing, and you also work in publishing.
Yes.
And in your interview, you stated that things like the hashtag publishing paid me, which ironically LL McKinney
yes.
created that.
Absolutely.
With publishing paid me movements, like We Need Diverse Books, there is just a pressure point on publishing for publishing BIPOC authors. We see you. That's what you said in the interview. So what I wanted to ask you with everything we've talked about today, do you still feel there's a passion for our stories?
This is it's a very complex question because I think in that interview, I was kind of trying to pull back the veil because readers don't necessarily know what's happening behind the scenes in publishing. And so when I said we see you, it's both writers, but also readers now, because I think what happened in 2020 is like there was this reckoning across the US, right? And so it wasn't just marginalized people who were like, oh, I've been here, I've been seeing this, and we all know it's a problem. It's like, no, sort of like there was an awakening where people were like, oh, I've been so, this has been non-existent to me, and now that I see it, now that you've pulled back that curtain, I can see that this is a huge problem. And I think readers were also like, I do want to read, stories written by Black writers. I do want to read more marginalized people's stories. And yes, publishers should be on the hook, right, to tell those stories, but not only to tell those stories, but also to pay people equitably, right?
Yeah.
Like to give these people a living wage for the writers that are writing full time, right? And so I think exposing the stuff that has been done behind the scenes was really important. And so, of course, We Need Diverse Books started as a hashtag, really at a conference called Book Expo America, which was one of the largest expos where booksellers, librarians, and reviewers would go to learn about new books that were coming out that fall or sometimes that early winter of the next year. And what they noticed was, only white writers were being promoted.
And a dog.
And a dog, yeah. There were like these huge,
I'm sorry,
big
grumpy
posters.
cat.
Huge. There were also dogs, so grumpy cat, all of that. And so they got really upset because at the time there was sort of like this huge hall where everyone is clamoring to get seats in to like figure out what are the hottest new books that are coming out, and like all of the panelists were all white. Most of them were male, and they were like, okay, there's you could have put more women on here, you could have put more BIPOC people on here. This is a huge issue. And one of the writers who had attended that kind of walked out and just tweeted, I'm so upset, Book Expo is so white, hashtag We Need Diverse Books. And then it kind of just trended right away. And so that, I feel like social media really got to show readers what was happening behind the scenes, what writers were actually experiencing in real time.
That's right.
These micro blogs, and we're seeing it with TikTok right now. I don't know if anyone is on Writer Talk, but if you're on there, you're seeing it. Like a lot of writers are talking about their frustrations, about their experiences. And while they're all varied, it is interesting to watch and to listen because each writer's experience is so vastly different. But all of the marginalized people, there's the same through line, right? Where they all have the same type of struggle. Like, it was really hard for me to get in the door, and then when I got in the door, it was really hard to get support around my book. And so it's showing readers like, okay, the publisher bought my story, but they didn't market it correctly, or you couldn't find the right audience. And so with all of that in mind, I think internally there are certain publishers that are, that has been their mission, to publish diversely, to publish books well. I think that Macmillan Publishers, which is the company that I work for, I think that they try really hard to publish diverse books, to publish diverse voices, to publish, opposite and opposing opinions. I think, that is good publishing, right? I think other publishers are also trying to do that. Are they doing it well? Maybe not, right? Because what ends up happening is it all trends. I think we were on a panel in New York, and I talked about some of the classic horror movies that came out in the 90s, like Vampire in Brooklyn, or Tales from the Crypt, like all of this stuff. The 90s was sort of a golden age for horror. Goosebumps had a television show, which I grew up on, and I loved the books, and then I was like, and I get to watch the show. So there was all this cool stuff happening, but also there was wonderful Black books being published in the 90s as well. And then the 2000s hit, and that kind of dipped and went away. Then it came back, and then it
90s,
dipped.
and then
Right. And so I think we're at that moment where it's like,
I agree.
Black stories are important to be told. People are still acquiring them, editor-wise, but are they being marketed the same way that they were during that, large national conversation? I think that is what's lacking.
Yeah, I know we were talking about that earlier. I think that all of us on the stage is a product of that passion of the 2020 situation. But it'll be interesting to see how it portrays later. So now I have a question for you, Miss Desiree. Desiree wrote a really great essay on crimereads.com about the history of horror and how Black people play into that, Black writers. It's an excellent essay. I would suggest that y'all look that up on crimereads.com. It's excellent work.
Thank you.
In this essay, you stated that we wanted to move Black teen girls from their conventional sidekick role of sassy best friend to the very center of the story. Doing so provides a healing moment for us as Black writers and Black readers. So can you elaborate a little bit on that, about the importance of that?
Yeah, I think that to experience the world as a Black girl, it's a very unique experience. But there's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of terror that we don't really talk about a lot. Oftentimes, we don't have places to process. And for me, books were a place to process. Horror books were a place to experience fear safely, between two covers, to really kind of think about, even perform it in your head. Like, how would I react in this situation? How did I, it was escape, but it was also, I thought of it as practice, Are there ways to think about my own survival through living vicariously through the survival of these girls who are often white teen girls, but that fear was universal. That sense of fear, that sense of foreboding, that sense of like there's something out to get me. And I was reading, I can't remember the writer now, who was talking once about why horror is something that Black folk can so relate to, and why giving us a chance to experience the genre as both kind of readers but also as writers is so important, because like the existence of racism often feels like this kind of surrealist experience, right? We're going through, we're often gaslighted and told that it's not really real. But you're like, but I see this and I experience this. Which, when you're in a horror story, that could be ghosts. That could be, supernatural as a kind of stand-in for that experience of what it is to exist in a world that is, something is happening to you, but you're being told it's not really happening to you. Or you're being told to like, just deal with it, on your own. And I feel like that kind of surreal experience of horror that you get when you're reading horror, and that surreal experience of racism itself, of this system and this kind of creature that feels so big and so terrifying, and you don't know what to do. That's kind of a similar experience. And I feel like when we get that chance to, be put at the center of that story, we see ourselves, and we can experience it as ourselves. And we can heal. I think there's healing in that. And I really think that it's so important that, Black girls have that space, in those conversations with themselves.
Because I know also you elaborated in the essay about, when you do see Black bodies and stories, not only is it more like it's either the magical Negro or it's like the sacrificial, you sacrifice for the white main character. And I think that, since we were not like the main characters in these stories, it's pretty much all that we had. And what I always like to say too, when we're dealing with, different types of stories, not just horror, just all stories, is how in the past Black readers have had to empathize with characters who do not look like them. And I think that I find it ironic that now people say, well, I can't connect to the character. As a Black reader, everybody knows that you can connect to the character. It's called empathy. And so I think that it's going to be interesting as more Black stories come out, how that can change. And I've already seen it. I mean, I've seen people been able to empathize. It is a choice. So
it is a choice. And I forget, this saying in writing, in creative writing field, the more specific an experience, the more universal it can also become.
That's
so
right.
this idea that, because the character is Black, I can't relate to them.
Black stories are universal stories.
It's a human story.
It's
right?
a human story. It's a choice, like I say before, and usually that's why when I hear that, I just don't even listen, because I know it's a choice, because I know that real readers, no matter what they look like, they can empathize with the character if they have that empathy inside of them. So that's not an excuse. So off my little soapbox. Thanks for talking to my TED Talk.
I love that, particularly like speculative fiction has the running joke. You can empathize with dragons and aliens and every other creature, but somehow
not a black body
is outside of the realm of possibility. And so
I just can see myself in that. Okay, so now let's get more into. I know that y'all have been on tour, and y'all have been talking to your contributors, and you've been in, like you've told me backstage. You told me you were doing most of the interviewing. So this is more like. So let's talk about both of your stories. So I'm gonna start with you, Saraciea. It's funny when you know someone as a writer, but you know them as a person, but then you read their stories and you're like, okay. I know that as a writer, I know that what we write is not biographical and whatever, but I still.
But I am all in this story.
I was like, Saraciea might have something to say. So your story, I have two questions for you. Why cemeteries?
Okay, so there are a few reasons why I chose cemetery. So the title of my short story is called Cemetery Dance Party. It's basically the senior classes, high school party. It takes place in a cemetery because the main character, Allie, is a horror enthusiast. So she grew up loving horror, and she's like, let's have a silent dance party because in past years, the senior party always gets shut down because they're like, it was too loud, it was too rowdy, you guys were having too much fun, so we had to shut it down. So she's like, this time we'll do a silent dance party, and we'll do it in a cemetery because no one is gonna come shut down a party in a cemetery. You can't even hear music. So in the character's mind, it was the right setting, but in my mind, there are a few reasons. So Night of the Living Dead, zombies, right? And so that was one of the inspirations for that. But I'm also a huge lover of Thriller by Michael Jackson, which that kind of is also weaved into the story. And so I was like, oh, this is like the perfect setting for it. But then real life, I actually lived in a building that was built over a cemetery. And when I was younger, I used to have dreams about the cemetery. And so it's something that has just been with me for a really long time subconsciously. And I think as writers, sometimes those subconscious thoughts come out in your stories. And I didn't realize that until actually I was revising the piece. And I was like, oh yeah, like I remember, growing up living in this building, and they were like, they would tell my mom, like, you should move your children out of that building because it was built on top of a cemetery, and don't you guys have nightmares? And it wasn't a nightmare for me. Like, I would have these dreams in the cemetery, and nothing like really like scary would happen in the dream, but I would just always be like, this is really weird. Like, I'm in this cemetery just walking around. And so a part of me is like,
They were visiting you. and
right,
your friends.
right. It was nothing malicious. I was just like, this is really interesting, you know? And so I was like 6 or 7, and like it was like a recurring dream. It was always the same thing. And again, nothing malicious ever happened. So those 3 things kind of inspired the cemetery. And then also, I'm a huge R.L. Stine fan. He has read his books in that cemetery. It's a famous cemetery in New York. It's the Woodlawn Cemetery. They do a lot of cultural programming there. And R.L. Stine has done lots of like read alouds and stuff there. And I was like, this will be also a little nod. So anyone else who's like a huge R.L. Stine fan and has gone to readings there will pick up on this.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, she likes to. Yeah, the Romero Living Dead. I was like, that
Yep,
went hard.
yep.
Yeah, that was hard. Now we're gonna segue to Desiree's story, and demons. Please discuss.
Yeah, so I love a good demon horror. So this story, okay, I went through a lot of different stories for this anthology. I will say that. And
Yes.
then I said, okay, let me just write about kind of myself. No, not really. But I was
Well, I
having
can
a lot.
see it.
I was having a lot of
Yeah.
insomnia. Well, for what I'm from Louisiana, so I love
Yeah, the
taking
bio.
us to the bayou. The swamp is a spooky, scary, full of story, haunted place, and I love setting stories there. So that's one. And I have been dealing with a lot of insomnia over the last few years, and just like kind of like, oh, that sense of constantly waking and feeling that early morning sense of feeling haunted, you know. And so that kind of worked its way into the story. Well, I knew I wanted something that was generational, that kind of spoke to like this idea of like trauma that kind of is, because we often talk in the Black community about like, you know, we inherit trauma. And I thought, like, what can I do that actually puts that on the page in a way that uses the supernatural to talk about that, right? What does it mean to really confront generational trauma, and what can it really look like when you actually the trauma is a supernatural creature.
Yeah, when it manifests, right?
That actually trauma manifested.
Literally,
literally
as a demon.
As a demon. And so, I just had this idea of like, okay, let me actually decide that we carry our demons, right? It's the saying, it goes, and I'm like, well, what if we carry our family's demons and our mother's demons and grandmother's demons? And it goes, it goes back and back to just the original hurt and the original trauma, and that kind of looks at that idea of what happened in slavery, during slavery. And so, and how that can really get passed down. And so I just love this idea of this reoccurring trauma, and like finally, you know, the final girl said, okay, no more, I'm gonna survive this, and I'm gonna face this, and I'm gonna like, you know, claim this space for my ancestors as well. And so I kind of really wanted to tell that story. Added in some of my favorite things, my favorite, the bayou, demons, night terrors, just this idea of like, that kind of half space between sleeping and waking, and that kind of feeling of hauntedness that appears there. Yeah.
I love that. It's funny when you're reading these stories and you see the final girl in each story. When I was reading this anthology, I actually was thinking about like each girl, how they had very specific kind of things they were dealing with. But like you just said, it was so specific, it's almost universal. I think if all 15 of these girls were in a room together having dinner and talking about the things they were able to survive, I think they would see and find a kinship between
Yes.
all 15 of them. Just like the perseverance and the grit and just the will to like never give up and just stay alive. I think all these 15 girls have that kind of situation. So with that being said, I'll let Saraciea go first. If you could pick 3 words to describe this anthology, what would it be?
Can I just say Black Girl Magic? No, I'm joking. That's already
Black girl
taken.
horror.
Right?
Black girl horror.
I think it's some of the words you already said, you know, really quickly before I select these 3 words. I think all of the characters in the beginning are one way, and by the end,
I agree.
they come out completely different. So I would definitely say transformation.
I love that.
Right? I would also say like unexpected confidence, because all of these girls are already confident in their own ways, but after they go
The
through
situation brings it out.
there's like a newfound confidence. It's like,
Yes.
okay, wow, I can withstand anything.
Yeah.
And then I would say like celebrating their blackness,
Yeah.
right?
I love it.
And just like a plus, like a plus
Yes, I love that.
community. I'll say community
Yes.
because
Yeah.
each of these stories, I feel like there's a community, there's a kinship,
You
friendship.
know
There's
what? Now that
friendship,
you mentioned that, I do
multiple-
agree because most of the stories, the girls in the stories, they have someone, they have that support, which I really loved. And in both of your stories, you have that, you have those friends that support them.
Yeah.
So what about you, Desiree? 3
I'm gonna
words, no
do a little
pressure.
cheat. I'm gonna actually steal Saracia's words, but she's been signing books with this this simple phrase: "You will survive."
Yes.
And I love because we're writing this. We're writing this to those teen girls, you know, who are going to be reading this, you know, dealing with their own terrors, whether they be simple or complex. We want them to know that, you know, you will survive. You know, you'll get, you know, just take this to heart, fight for it, fight for yourself. You know, I actually mentioned that at the event that we did last night. One of my favorite quotes is from Octavia Butler's Parable series. Lauren, who's the ultimate final girl of her first book, she has a recurring motto that she says. She says, "I aim to survive." You know, she is survivor girl in this book. She's a teen girl who ends up leading her own community, and you know, she from the very get-go, she kind of sees what's coming. This is a dystopian kind of apocalyptic setting, and she's like, we know that in order for us to survive, we have to do these things. And so she's really early on to take leadership to make sure that not only herself but her community and her family survives. And she has a go bag that she has ready at every instance in case something happens. You know, she's prepping, she's ready, she's pre-prepper before you know.
Yeah, she was a prepper. She read that book.
Yeah.
With those herbs.
Yeah. And I just loved. I remember when I was a kid when I first read this book, and I thought like, oh, if I had a tattoo, I would tattoo on my arm, "I aim to survive." And so for me, I think back to that as a kind of maybe one of my first final girl moments as I thought about this collection.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, I really like that. So now we're gonna talk about some things that y'all like outside of the anthology. I'm gonna let you go first, Desiree. What horror tropes would you like to see in Black horror? From a book perspective.
Gosh, I feel like all of them. I know that's a cheat. I love a good Gothic. I love the tropes of the Gothic. I love this idea of places that were once considered splendor by some, but decaying as a representation of the kind of sickness and illness and perils that could exist in places we don't consider damage, but they are a part of the damage, right?
Yes.
And so I love a good Gothic. So I would love more Gothic. I would love more exploration of the Gothic. Southern Gothic, obviously, we're here in the South celebrating that as well. I love a good creature feature. And I would love to see more Black folks have an opportunity to either play werewolves, vampires, or to explore those universes, right? And so, more creature features. You know, I love a good paranormal, a good ghost story, but I would love to. We talked about this a little bit at one of our other events. Black folk, you know, particularly I think about Black folk in the South in particular, and our kind of our folk traditions and our cultural histories. We talk to our dead. We have different experiences with this idea of ancestry and kind of, you know, and those who have passed. And I would love to see that appear more in the work. It's not just ghosts as these kind of malevolent horror figures, but also like ghosts as ancestry, ghosts as people we talk to for advice, ghosts as people who can walk with us and share our experience and also aid us, right? So thinking of our own cultural traditions and histories when it comes to how we talk to our dead and communicate with our dead.
Yeah, especially in the South, we do talk to it differently. Yeah, me and you, we're on the same wavelength with the Gothic. I love a good Southern Gothic fiction. I know Eden Royce is one of my favorite authors.
We're so happy
who
to
does
invite Eden.
the Southern Gothic tradition. And I, with Southern Gothic myself. Haven't written a Southern Gothic novel. What about you, Saraciea? What do you want to see?
Oh
in
man,
horror
I mean,
fiction?
like Desiree, I want to see so much, but I think I'll go with really what I enjoy because, of course, I'm a reader.
Yeah, what you want to see?
I'm not just a writer; I'm a reader as well. I was talking to Desiree about this. I want more horror comedies. I want more horror romances. You know, I think romance is having a huge moment right now, and romance fantasies, which you might have heard the new buzzword, romantasy. It's having a moment. We were brainstorming. I was like, maybe if we come up with like a horror-mance or something, a cool buzzword.
I think they're calling it horror romance.
Right. I was like, well, maybe we'll get more. But those two in particular, I was like, I love a good horror comedy or horror romance. I think about some of the movies that I loved, which is more gory, like Cabin Fever, but right, like there's like these couples in the cabin, and there's like really gross scenes. But you know, The House of Wax, right? It's like again, friends and couples going on a road trip, and then they enter this like really horrific place, and I love stuff like that. And so I think a lot of horror does end up having a little bit of romance in it anyway, or like some type of intimate relationship, because you're literally you're like trying to survive, and so you're like, man, I gotta call my mama, or I gotta call my best friend, because like you know, I don't know, this could be the end of everything, and you start to see the intimacy of those relationships, whether it's familial or you know intimate, and I want to see more of that in horror. I also want to see more space horror. You know, I think having Courtney Nash's story.
The cosmic horror, that was good.
It was so good. And I was like, I want more of that, you know, because of course, Alien, right? Just, come on. It was just one of my favorites growing up. And then to have a movie finally with a black, you know, final girl, Sonali, I was like, heck yeah, I want more of that, you know?
That was such a good movie.
It was so good.
It was so good when she was running with the alien. You remember he put that acid on her face? Spoiler alert, I'm sorry. They start running together. That was so good.
Well, what was really cool, really quickly, is during our NPR interview, I had mentioned Sanaa Lathan, and they even put a clip from the movie, like a little audio in there, where you hear Sanaa saying, like, you're gonna see a lot of stuff, you know, like don't lose your, you know, don't lose your shit. Excuse my French, but you know, hold it together. And I was like, yes. You know, like name another leader that would tell you that. They'll probably just be like, all right, let's go. And then people get afraid and they get scared. But
That was
she's
a
like,
good
I'm telling you now, like you don't know what to expect down there, but don't freak out. You got to keep your cool. And I'm like, that's
I like
what
the way
wanna
they did
see.
those clips. If y'all want to go listen to that interview on NPR, it's really good. They put clips in there from the movies y'all mentioned. Now,
it's really cool.
I think I already know the answer to this question, but I want to let you talk to the audience about that. Okay, you only can pick one though. Only one. Favorite horror movie, Desiree.
Oh my gosh. Oh, I think I answered this in our, we did some clips about this on social media. A Nightmare on Elm Street, which I realized at our first event was probably another inspiration for my story subconsciously.
Really?
Yeah, because of the dreams.
The dreams, yeah.
You know what?
I love a good nightmare. I love a good night hag story. I love any kind of like, you know, we have in Louisiana, we have our version of a night hag, which y'all have in South Carolina called a boo hag. We have something called a kushma, which is like French for dream. We call it kushma, which is a nightmare hag that comes in, you know, sucks your blood, demon hag that causes nightmares, and everyone, like, particularly the Black community, you cannot say the name, you cannot mention it. Like, even me saying it now, I'm like terrified. Like, it's just one of those things.
I was like, he's gonna come visit you tonight.
Don't you say that to me.
They travel. They're gonna travel down I-20.
But,
He's gonna travel down to you.
No. But so I love that, and it's just like it's just everyone's still terrified in my community to even talk about that. So it's just like,
this is the thing about Nightmare on Elm Street to me. Nightmare on Elm Street to me is so horrifying because it's almost like the Body Snatchers, right? Because you have to go to sleep. You really
have to go to sleep.
It's no escaping going to sleep, and so it just that's what makes it so horrible because you eventually will fall asleep. You will fall asleep. All right. I think I know, but just I think everybody probably knows.
I don't know. Well, I mentioned a lot of my favorites already, but I'm gonna mention one that I mentioned last night, which is something that I watched every single night in high school. I shared a room with my two sisters, they really hated this ritual, and then they ended up loving this ritual. Scary movie, which, you know, it has, of course, is like a horror parody, right, of all of a mashup of all of the scary movies that came out. But I am of the age of VCR, so believe it or not, I actually still have this on VHS.
I love it.
And I kept the VCR. My parents were like, "We're gonna throw this out." I was like, "I'll come pick it up, and you know, I'll come get those movies that I used to watch." But you know, every single night before I went to bed, I would put this movie on and watch it, and they were like, "I'm so tired of watching this," and I'm like, "Okay, I'll just fast forward to my favorite scene." So there's like a scene where he's like, "Grab my strong hand," and it just cracks me up so much. But it's also very horrific because it's like, I don't want to die. I have to grab this hand that creeps me out. So it's like, do I do it or do I not? Do I like fall to my death? So it was just moments of levity where it's like, it's horror, but then you see that.
And that's your love for horror comedy right there.
Exactly.
But also, it was hella diverse, you know.
Yes, it
And
was such a
in a lot
diverse
of ways,
cast.
Meta speaking back to the kind of ultra whiteness of that boom, that 90s boom of horror, to have like us in that tradition of like Tales from the Hood, like kind of like mocking, but also sharing our love of the genre. Yeah. Yeah.
So now we're just going to do like a little lightning round, little fun to wrap this up, make it kind of fun. Just no pressure or anything. So I'm just going to ask some questions of y'all. And just, you know, tell me what you want, okay? There's only two choices. You have to pick one. It doesn't mean that you like one or the other. You just have to pick them. Vampires or werewolves? Vampires? Okay. Demons or shapeshifters?
Even though I wrote a demon story, I'm going to say shapeshifters. Really? Yeah.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, there's something about them.
Haunted house or haunted forest?
I write a lot more haunted forests, so I'm going to go with that.
Bloody curse or bloody murder?
Bloody curse.
Come on, that's too hard to choose. That's a hard one. I do like gore, so I'll go with bloody murder.
Gotcha.
But that is a really hard
That's a hard one.
I do my best.
It's a good one.
Okay. Annabelle or Chucky?
Chucky is quack. That was my Chucky was one of my favorites childhood, and like the new series, y'all, is so good. There's a TV version. Watch it. It's so good. It's so good.
Freddy or Jason?
Freddy versus Jason. Freddy had so many evolutions. I just love when he was like the wisecracking. Like there was a moment in like the fourth, fifth, sixth one where they just turned him into like this joke of himself, but it was also like hella funny, you know, the horror comedy. So Freddy, all the way. He had some good wisecracks.
Now I have some scenarios, and you can only choose one of the two. Doesn't mean you will, all right, let's discuss this. Die at the beginning of the zombie apocalypse, or survive after everything has gone to hell?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, we gotta survive. We gotta go with the surviving. Although I feel like this is one of the conversations we often have over drinks. It's like, what will we really do?
So, okay,
like,
so
I don't want to go through it. I don't want to go through it.
So both of y'all survive. Okay.
We're gonna survive. We're gonna be Michonne up in here.
Okay, this is my last one. Okay. Kill the serial killer at the beginning, or save the black girl from the serial killer at the end.
Oh. Can we wait. Oh. Well, in real life, probably kill him at the beginning, but in the story, save the black girl. Yeah. So I can have that journey towards the end. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good job, y'all. Good job.
That was some great scenarios. That was some like, ooh. Those law school exam scenario. You're like,
I take my moderation responsibilities very seriously.
Love it.
Okay, y'all. So it's been wow. We've been talking for an hour, y'all. It doesn't seem like it, but we have. So I wanted to open it up for any questions. If anybody has any questions you want to ask or anything from the girls.
Someone have a question?
I have a confession that I haven't really read horror much, of anything. So where should I start other than this anthology? But yeah, where should I start to become a lover?
It's a great place to start because I've had a lot of people tell me, "Oh my God, I don't read horror, but I'll read this for you." And I'm like, this is a spoiler. It's not super, 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 super scary, so you'll be okay. You will survive. It's a good entry level. Okay. It's creepy. Okay. Not really. Not a lot of people are afraid of the gore. The gore level is not. We're not. Not a lot of fans of the gore amongst the writers. So you'll be okay. I think so. But entry entry level horror or entry like.
I do.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's a little romance. Right. What's the author's name? Okay. Yeah. So yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And I would also ask y'all to go deeper with you. Like, what kind of other genres do you like? What do you like? Historical? Do you like?
Yeah. I'll see you afterwards
we'll
for
talk
a one-on-one
afterwards.
consultation.
We'll get that rec list going. Thank you. Well, thank you for coming tonight, even though you're not necessarily a horror fan. Yeah.
I have a few recommendations. I'm going to recommend Ring Shout. Because it's a horror novella. And I think if you're just starting, doing shorter books helps. Silvia Moreno Garcia, she writes a little bit of everything. So she has like a Mexican Gothic one that came out. She has Silver Nitrate, so she's doing vampires and stuff like that too.
Talking about how anthologies are a good place to start, short fiction collections. There's a lot of horror writers who do short fiction, and you can kind of go back to the person who did our intro. Tananarive has a couple of really great short fiction collections that are, I think, again, kind of easy entry points, short form. Therefore, you don't Ghost Summer. Yep, where you don't have to, go with it as a novel length, but you can kind of get bite size.
And then I have one more because it's 2024. Octavia E. Butler, The Parable of the Sower, which is the book that she was referencing. I swear there's a lot of... Oh, perfect. Yeah, I was like, it's not really classified as horror, but there's some horror themes in there, so it's a good one to start. Yeah, of course. Any other questions?
What did you all think of Lovecraft Country, the HBO series?
Oh, I absolutely loved it. I was really bummed when it didn't get the second season. But I was really excited to see where the writers were going to take it if they did get a second season. Because I think you're right. It's like they should have did it as a limited series. But I was like, I'm hopeful that they'll do a follow-up to it. And actually, the book that I recommended, Ring Shout, I would kind of comp to that specific HBO series, and then also the Ballad of Tom by Victor Laval. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's another short book, and it's so good, and I would also comp it to that. But yeah, I was really bummed. But I think if you're looking for something like that, like in the vein of that, there's some shows that are cropping up. There's okay. Yeah, I was a fan of it. Yes, they did a really good job.
I love the series. I had read the book a couple of years. This is written by a white author, actually, but he did a lot of good research. And when they were adapting the series, they were really, adamant about bringing in Black screenwriters, Black historians, like a lot of folk to really, be in conversation about how do we do this right. And I think they did a really good. This is an example of how you do a really good adaptation, and you kind of make it Black horror, right? And you actually have Black people at the center of it, and it's. Well, that's beautifully done and beautifully shown. Absolutely. Oh, that scene in the diner. I'm sorry. Sometimes you think about these moments where you're just like, oh, yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this was worth it. Even though there was a second season, but I think it was a powerful example of the first season. Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Clifton. I'm from Arkansas. And I had a question for our writers up here today. I'm an aspiring writer. I'm working on 2 books right now. And thank you. What really got me interested was when you mentioned the Southern Gothic, because I'm writing a lot about that in my book. I come from kind of like a church background. And so also a lot in tune with spirits and stuff like that. So those that leave us, they don't really leave us. They leave one form, but they still leave traces of them with us. And so writing things like that in my book has been very inspiring. But horror is not typically my thing. I grew up on Jeepers Creepers, 13 Ghosts, really traumatized me. So I'm like, no, I'm good. Yeah. So what actually drew you to the horror genre, and was it automatic for you?
You go first. I love your story.
So I have a very large family. I have 2 older brothers, and they used to tease me something fierce. And so a part of their torture was, hey, Saraciea, it's movie night. We're going to watch some movies. Oh, yeah, you can imagine where it's going to go. And, Candyman, Leprechaun, Night of the Living Dead, all of it. It was just, oh, yeah, mom's like, we're babysitting. We know what we're doing tonight. And each time I would just fall for the trap over and over again, where I'm like, this is the night they're going to be nice to me, and I'm not going to be tortured and not going to be afraid. And so I decided, I'm not going to close my eyes. I'm not going to scream. I'm not going to cry. I'm going to show my 2 brothers that I can sit here and watch this stuff too, and I'm going to be okay with it. So it was sort of like just watching it and facing my fears. But in addition to that, growing up in a huge household, I had to share a room with several of my sisters, and at one point I was living with my cousins as well, and so some of us had to share beds. So there were two of us in each bed, and it was bunk beds and stuff like that. And you can imagine a room full of young kids, everyone's talking, no one's going to sleep on time, and so it was kind of like, you need to go to bed. And so we were like, well, what are we going to do to make ourselves fall asleep? We're going to tell scary stories in the dark. And so I got it both ways, right? From my brothers and from my sisters. And so each night we would take turns telling each other stories. And they would scare the crap out of me. And everyone else is knocked out. And I would just be in bed still thinking man, that was really scary. Oh my gosh. And so I was like, okay, when it's my turn, I have to up the ante. And so it's kind of like feeling my sister or my cousin, whoever I was lying next to, tense up. I'm like, I got him. You're going to be scared crapless tonight. You're going to be the one, still with your eyes open at the end of the day. And so I think between those 2 things, it was sort of I wasn't really into horror, but because I had family that was into it, I kind of got into it, because it started with my brothers well, I'm going to subvert this and show you that nothing is going to scare me, even though there are certain things that still scare me. I will not watch any ghost movies, for example, because I have actually seen ghosts in real life. So that's one type of horror. I'll read the books, but as far as watching it on the screen, it just does something to me that is very traumatic, that I'm like, I'm going to walk out the room. Y'all enjoy that. And I'm like, I don't have anything to prove, because I'll still watch other creepy stuff. But I will say, I think with horror, it's really for me, it's exploring those fears. But also, I like comedy. Sometimes I like cheesy stuff. So it's also exploring that. I think when I was really scared, watching those movies, I would always try and crack a joke. Come on, guys, when are you going to turn this off? Or, and then I would see in some of the movies that they did crack jokes, and so they would put on stuff that Spike Lee made, where I'm like, oh, there could be humor in horror, okay, maybe that'll get me through it. And so realizing that, you know, maybe you may not be a horror writer who writes ghosts or that does body horror or gore, but maybe you do other types, right? I think one of the things we didn't touch on tonight, but I brought this up before, when we curated this collection, Desiree had the fantastic idea to send all of the contributors sort of all of the subgenres within horror that you could write about. And so one of the contributors, Zakiya Dalila Harris, she writes about psychological horror. So it's kind of like in that Jordan Peele vein, right? Where it's like, okay, maybe I want to do some mind stuff where your mind is perceiving something, right? Like she was saying, am I being gaslit, or was that really something that actually happened? So maybe that's the type of horror that you're into. So I would say give horror a chance and just know that like you're gonna find like, okay, like for me, I'm like, no ghost movies, ghost stories, I'll read those, but I'm not gonna watch them, right? Possession stories and stuff like that, sure, cool, but am I gonna write that? Probably not. Am I gonna do body horror? Absolutely. Creature feature? Yes. You know, like gore and stuff like that? Absolutely. So I think playing around with the genre, but I wanted to give you a book recommendation really quickly because you said that you want to write about like the ancestors and stuff like that and ghosts. I think this one is a YA one. It's called Shadow Shaper by Daniel Jose Older. It's a really cool YA fantasy book. It's a Black female character. It's actually the first time I saw a Black girl with big curly hair on the cover, and it was just like a very strong moment for me in my life. I was like, we could do that, and like she could be artsy. So the main character's name is Ciara. She's an artist, and she's able to make her art come alive through her ancestors. So like it's really cool. And she's fighting battles and trying to like save the city. It's amazing. And then I want to put you on to Alaya Dawn Johnson. She's one of my absolute favorite writers. If you've never read her stuff, highly recommend. Alaya, Alaya, Dawn, Dawn Johnson. And her book, Trouble the Saints, I think will be really interesting to you. It's an adult book that is sort of, it's like what do we call it? Like a fantasy noir is what we called it. But it also has like some thriller aspects in it. And I feel like that might be good for you to read. But yeah, you could do horror or you could do dark fantasy too. I think some people classify some dark fantasy stories as horror, but I'm gonna pass it to Desiree because she also has a interesting story really quickly.
Oh, how did I get involved with horror? Okay, so my first story I ever wrote when I was 4 years old was a ghost story, and it's been there ever since. I just always loved speculative fiction in all forms, like fantasy, sci-fi. I was like obsessed with aliens, like when I was a teenager, which comes out kind of in my in my story for her anthology. My obsessions, I write them on the page. And so I just always love this idea of what is beyond, what if, that question of what if, which I think is a part of so much of how we tell fantasy, sci-fi, and horror stories, the possibilities that are out there. And so, yeah, it's drawn me. And horror is, I guess, a great avenue for exploring that because it explores all of our anxieties and fears in a way that I think no other genre can really do.
Something about the Southern Gothic and everything, and that's what I write as well. I wrote Eden's Everdark, which is a Southern Gothic based on the Georgia C. Allens and the Gula Geechee people. And so what Saraciea was saying earlier about it doesn't have to be horror. I mean, the whole point of Southern Gothic, it's not necessarily the jump scare, it's the dread, it's the house, it's the people, and with Black Southern Gothic, it's about enslavement too, and ancestors and all that stuff, and so with your Southern upbringing, if you don't want to, I think that's the thing, right? People think of horror as just as one kind of thing, but it's very, very, very broad. I think horror is something that makes you uncomfortable. Anything that makes you uncomfortable can be considered horror to me. Anything that's disturbing, anything that brings you dread, anything that doesn't sit right with you. I think all of those things can be horror. It doesn't necessarily have to be a specific thing. So, yeah.
We try to really bring that with the different kind of stories in it. A little piece of every, not every subgenre, but like a little taste of the different genres. Because I think like again, a lot of people think, oh, they think of slashers or they think of like monsters, creatures automatically, but it's like there's so much different ways of thinking about, as Karen has pointed out, what we're afraid of. How do we kind of confront our fears? I mean, Twilight Zone, these kind of stories, that I grew up with, again, which were just really about being unsettled, being taking outside the norm for just a moment, and the horror that can accompany that.
Thank y'all so much.
One more for you is Randall Keenan's A Visitation of Spirits, which is more.
Randall Keaton, yes, he's great.
Thank y'all so much for being with us. Thank you all for being with us tonight. We really appreciate it. Go out and tell your friends, and especially tell younger folks about this book. Please request it from your public library. It really does help authors when you request the book in the public library. Get it on that most requested list. We like to see that, the long lines for it. All of the books that y'all mentioned as, suggested other reads we do carry at Charis. But you can buy Karen's books out front, some of Karen's books out front, and of course the anthologies that we discussed tonight. So we'd love for you to join us in the lobby, get your book signed, hang out, meet the authors, and spend a little time with us. So thank you.
Thank you so much for coming out.